Greetings, everybody. Welcome to Lunar Alchemy. My name is John. With here, as always, is Bella. I'm so happy to be here on our 1-year anniversary of going around the wheel with Lunar Alchemy. That's such an exciting sort of day and kind of realization to come back to be able to explore some of the energies that we've been with before. And we are now focusing in a new direction. So we are now today going to focus on the archetypes and the elements, bringing some wisdom, mythic wisdom to the transit, and using that to assist us in the quantum integration that we explore each and every session with our quantum energetic transmissions. So I'm very excited to be here and talking about Gene Key 30 and the fire starter. This is probably one of the energies that exists in the world that is responsible for the most terrifying awareness of nature. So I can't wait to get into this discussion of the archetype and how it impacts our evolution. Bella, happy anniversary.
Yeah, I felt the anticipation because I've been seeing on my Facebook memories every day, we were starting to speak about it, and then this was like the first one. So I'm excited too. And in some ways it feels like it was not long ago. And in some ways it feels like it was forever ago that we started. So
absolutely. And I was thinking back to the very first session that we did, and I really couldn't recall it until it popped up on social media. And then I was like, oh man. So in looking back at what we covered last year, I discovered that the transmission was already in alignment with the new focus of the direction that we want to go in, which is to integrate the differences, the energies that are coming together to alchemize our evolution, that we can experience as the sun, the moon, and the earth itself. So Bella, I was hoping that today you would be able to introduce the archetype of the fire starter and maybe just talk about archetypes in general a little bit, depending on where you want to enter this topic from, because you've invested so much time and energy into developing these forms that we can personally relate with, that embody the energies of the hexagrams of the I Ching, the gates of human design, the gene keys themselves. So I'd love to hear about where you're coming from with all this.
Yeah, and I feel like that's extra important in the sense that we decided that those conversations, they're not just going to be streamed out there and we don't really get much feedback under them from our members. So we are going to take those conversations that we're doing every week. And now this year, we're even going to try to do those archetypes, because it's 6 days in a transit. Those archetypes that we didn't do last year, we're going to do Tuesdays and Thursdays. So all these conversations are going to go inside Inner Circle. They are still accessible, they're still free, but you have to sign up for them to get the Zoom link and be with us, because that way we can follow the conversation that is live, everybody's together. And it just feels like that intimacy. I feel the 59 has been present for me lately, and it feels to have even that transparency. We're there together, we have people with us, and it just feels that's the next step. So because of that, to speak a little bit about the archetypes and how they were born, I think it's important. I believe that I know that it came very naturally, and I believe it was just the way that Ashley and I had related to gates, hexagrams, and gene keys, because we have those 3 things that are the same. And then So how in our world did they come together? Well, they came together in an archetype. And I feel like we were already speaking about some of the Jinkies Gates hexagrams as the archetype. And today is especially perfect because we have this hexagram that is fire over fire. So of course the name, the fire starter, is like so perfectly aligned. And most of the names came very naturally. Some of them were not that easy. So it really has been a spiral dynamic in how some of the archetypes came to us and said, I'm the fire starter, and some of them have really developed from year to year. This is the third year that we are doing them. And even if you go to the website now, you see that it's not this organized thing where all of them have the same format. And I've even had in those gates that we are in now, I've not even gone back to the copy or the description of the archetype for the last 3 doors, I think. So there is something where they have their own life. I think it's important with the archetypes that is something that we can relate to and identify with, in the sense that when somebody says, I have this gene key, this is who I am, this is my life's work, like it can be almost like something you can't separate yourself from. And I believe that that's a little bit dangerous. When it comes to the archetype, you can take on the costume of the archetype. You can get to know the archetype. You can see it in your loved ones that might have that gene key somewhere in their chart. So it becomes this way of relating with something that is valuable, but it's not a label on you that says you are this.
Yeah,
That's been very important.
Yeah, and it's interesting that actually came up directly into my experience recently in one of the social media groups. There was one of the members of that groups was really struggling to understand their identity in relationship with these systems of understanding the energy that comes through us. And anytime we get into a state of saying, I am this, we can, depending on whatever that is that we choose to identify with, we can sometimes feel very confused because we may not feel 100% resonance with that thing that we identify as outside us. And it's so, I mean, this particular topic with lunar alchemy is so very central to what it is that we're doing, because if we think back in human history, before the development of a strong egoic nature, where we identify ourselves as a personality, an individual, separated from every other human being, every aspect of nature around us, we may have been able at one time to integrate the energies of the moon, for instance, or the sun in a very natural way, just as it happens with animals in nature. But along our process of evolution, we began to separate ourselves from these forces that are working through us. So whether or not you happen to identify with an archetype or a particular energy, what all of this is about is being able to recognize the energy that is present without using it to box oneself in as a possibility of life. Meaning, when we look in human design and I say, I'm a 6-2 manifesting generator with emotional authority, that doesn't really say anything about what my identity is. And it simply is a description of how energy moves through my system. And I can become anybody with that system. It just is going to happen in a particular way for me. And when we're looking at an archetype like the fire starter, I have the 30 in my evolution sphere. Bella, I know you have the 30 in your midheaven, and I think they match up even with the lines that we're working the same energy. Well, we're working the same energy, but in different ways. And it's going to come through us in different ways. So
yeah, there's something with that I want to add, because there has been those decisions, and I have the second Ching in my life's work, so I am kind of discovering as I'm going. I feel in the moment this is the direction, and then I go there. And what I know has happened with those archetypes, like what you were saying in the beginning, you know, identifying with them. After a while with them, they started to come through like feminine or masculine, she or he. And the way with the description, because I wanted to be alive, I wanted to be felt, I want the costume to feel like, you know, you can try it on. It became, in the process of writing, so much more rich and so much more possible to relate when I called them he or she. And that was one of the things, you know, who says, you know, you could say, oh, let me go in and see what the elements are. Is that more yin element or yang element? Or how many yin lines is it? How many yang? Like, there's so many ways that we could go in and say, oh, no, but this looks like it's very much more masculine. So I would say some of these things are not logical decisions that they have to be a certain gender. It's in the play with them, how they come out and they speak to me in my world. And then that's how they came out. And I know that with the 29, which is your life's work, which is the water goddess, you know, I don't even see as the water man, but you could be, you know.
Right.
So for me, that was one of the things that was a choice was made somewhere along the way in the writing process. And the other thing that I wanted to mention as well was this decision to not go into the shadows. And, you know, me, as a person who's done shadow work forever, and I say it over and over and again, it might be interesting to be like, why is she now doing this? It's so different. For me, what I felt, especially because I want people to take on the costume without feeling like they're taking on a big shadow, to speak about those archetypes. They're not human, like they are archetypes. And for me, the best way of portraying them was really the pathway of the gift frequency. I don't go too much into the city, but this last year, the codon ring have started to come in. And I would say the codon rings are quantum, and there is something there that has a lot of magic in it. But really the way we speak about them is the gift frequency. And I would even dare to say, somebody who has the fire starter in their life's work and they read it and they're like, no, this is not how I work. Possibly it's because they have more lived that key in contraction than in expansion. So there is also that decision to really portray the pathway, the gift frequency, and a little touch of magic. And maybe sometimes there's one sentence that says, this archetype has learned to overcome this challenge, but it's always framed in a positive way. So that's, I feel too, why it's not dangerous to play with them, because they can only just show you more of what's in there and what you could play with as well in your own life.
Well, interestingly, you know, with this particular archetype, I mean, I started off by saying the fury of nature. You know, this is one of the most terrifying energies for most humans to encounter, because the individual is completely expendable for this force of nature that works through our genetic systems. And when, you know, we're talking about this gift frequency of the pathway of lightness, which allows us to have a measure of freedom around the particular energy. You know, how are our desires driving us? And when I look at the way that this particular key functions across the history of humanity, I mean, this key is literally responsible for the most heinous things in the history of the planet that human beings have done to nature, to each other, to ourselves. And even within the gift frequency, there's this little hint of the possibility of self-annihilation that happens because, it's even interesting. I was looking, the image that you use in the 64 doors for the fire starter. It's like this little phoenix, and it reminds me of there's sort of a modern printing of the book Catch 22, and it has a very, very similar image right on the cover. And I was thinking about that, like, oh man, this particular key is a catch 22. Like, you can't transcend desire. So what is it about this pathway that brings this archetype alive? Like, if you're a highly developed spiritual seeker in any number of traditions that examines and takes on this aspect of humanity that is focused upon desire, and you get to a point where you have a great deal of space, a great deal of lightness about every aspect of your life, even your desire to transcend the desires of the body or of nature is going to prevent you from making the final leap into the frequencies of the rapture. So I love this key because there's no goal here. Like, the idea of having a goal with the gene keys, human design, I Ching, anything, it just takes it and it like throws it out the window. Like, it doesn't even matter, just burns it up. So how does this pathway kind of light up this archetype? Because we're not going to become free of desire. So it's not about transcending the shadow. And if we're not going to become free of desire, there's no way to experience the city. So this is a paradox. It's a catch-22. What is going on with this archetype that is something that we can kind of like use like a costume, try on and understand to like enrich our path?
I feel it's so important and interesting with this key, because we had a call with our portals of deconditioning people, and I came into the call about the 30 saying I'm a little bit uncertain what the question is to contemplate or inquire, is usually how I speak about it, the question for inquiry today. And it felt like wherever I went with this, it felt like I was just going to go in rounds. Like, it's very much like you were saying, the catch-22. Like, I felt like after an hour and a half, are we going to be clearer? Are we going to be richer? Are we going to feel like there is any value? And I really came on with that kind of uncertainty, saying, maybe you helped me. And it was a beautiful conversation. I feel that the way that we can shine light on it is to go back to the human design mechanics and know that the start codon is 41 and it starts in the root center, then it meets the 30 that is in the emotion center. So here is where the human process starts. This is the fuel to experience, the fuel to feel that comes from the 41 and meets this desire to act, the emotional counterpart that actually makes it happen. And then it's going to go up through that emotional center, 35, 36, that channel of transistoriness, the hunger and the consummation of that hunger. And then it goes up in the 1156, and it's about all these ideas of what you could experience, and some of it's going to happen, some is not going to happen. And then we have on the other side, because the body switches from the brain, so then we have the 47, 64 between the head and the ajna, and that is to see the patterns, but in hindsight. So when you have this fire, you have the desire, the fire to experience, and it's the human experimental way. You're going to go through life in transitions, in experiences, and it's not until you look back at that experience that you know if it was valuable or not. So even therefore, because that's the process, to just speak about desire and trying to make sense of it, I feel like you're saying, even reading the Gene Key book sometimes doesn't give you like a solution of it. So that's the first part. And then I have something more, but I want to let you in before I maybe go there.
Yeah, well, what that really makes me think about is, how do we, as a human being who identifies ourselves as a specific individual with a specific personality, with a specific human design, and all of these things make us entirely unique in the world. Yet here we are, universally, as a human species, we all have to come to a way of relating with our desires. Do I eat this or do I eat that? Do I pursue this career or do I pursue that career? And you could expand that like without end. There's not always just two options, but you could just go on and on and on forever about all the different options and the ways that desire comes through us to drive us in the direction of gaining new experience. And when I look at how, like, if we look at fire itself, the element of fire, it clings to that which it is fed. So like, if you have a fire going, the only way it's going to continue going is if you feed it more things to burn. And it just made me think about, okay, so I do have the ability to make mental choices that are different than my emotional experience. Mm-hmm. So when I'm having an emotional drive to do a certain thing and my mind is going like, but that's bad for me, or that's bad for someone else, or that's bad for something that you care about, so I don't want to engage in that. We often feel this inner conflict of like, oh, but I want to, oh, but I can't, oh, but I want to. And it really comes down, we sit in this sort of like stasis state where now the only experience that we're being driven to is one of inner conflict, which, yes, is going to eventually contribute to our own evolution, but it's not like valuable to ourselves. Like, we hate it. I mean, I don't feel bad about saying that as like a universal thing. When we have inner conflict, it's not really it's not the thing that we're looking for. It's not satisfying. That desire drive just keeps like tugging at us. So I just think about, like, being a fire starter is someone who's going to tend a fire, someone who's going to light it and feed it. So what's the move is to choose your fuel. If you have a bad diet and you can't help your ice cream cravings at 10 at night or whatever it is, whenever that comes up for you, feed it something else when the desire comes, and have some lightness about the fact that your desire was unmet. Eventually, the fire will transform and start burning the broccoli that you feed it instead. And it just made me think, like, wow, human beings are such an unusual aspect of nature, because we're so driven by this motivation, and we have so much agency over the outcomes of our choices. And yet most individual human beings don't feel that way. I mean, what's the buzzword of spiritual communities these days? Sovereignty, which means that you have the freedom to basically, make your choices, live with the consequences of those choices, move in the direction that you want to move, basically moving in freedom. And to me, that just says how utterly unfree we feel in these bodies, in these societies, in these situations. So that's what I'm thinking about with this archetype, is like, how do I get to the point where I'm just looking around a field of fuel and I'm just going to choose the fuel based on the outcomes that I want, the type of fire I want to burn, instead of being like, how do I get this fire to stop popping up everywhere? I don't know. I mean, I'm curious how that plays into your ideas, Bella, about this experience. And particularly, you know, you have this as your midheaven. So I know you have a direct experience of this particular energy. So how does that, what are your thoughts about that?
You know, what you say makes sense. And especially from, you have 6 lines in your profile, in your, like the main lines. And also we both have this particular key in a 6th line. And at the same time, I'm thinking, here we're in the emotional center pointing towards the root center. Where's the awareness? Like the solar plexus is becoming an awareness center, but I don't think that it's logical in any way. It's abstract. So I don't think that we can decide our desires, and I don't necessarily think we can substitute them for something healthier either, or not even that we can be light about them, because I don't know if that is the process that we're meant to be able to have. Like the whole experimental way, the human way, is to be able to get the wisdom from having jumped. And we can see the programming partner here is at 29. It says yes to the experience, whatever it is. It goes down to the abyss and it lives it fully in full devotion. And then on the other side, that's what the abstract in the chart is about. So I have kind of a little bit gone into finding alternative ways of understanding it. And especially for the new way that we're doing lunar alchemy, for me, it was important to go back to the I Ching. And even I have worked with a Colombian astrologer who is actually synthesizing all the systems. And I would today, and I haven't told him, I'm going to have to tell him that I'm using his images. Today, I wanted to just take a little diving in, because I think, especially as we're going to do this in a more intimate setting, I don't think that all the times have to be the same. There's a part of me that wants them all to be the same and wants them to, then somebody comes in and they want to have their lives work in evolution. It's exactly the same format. But I just realized that that's not me. And maybe this is my midheaven. My midheaven is how I'm seen out in the world. And the third, in the, like the fire, like I will be bored. So for me today, what I looked at, well, the word that Sergio is using for this hexagram is connection. So I went down to, I usually look at this one, this is I Ching meditations, because it's so simple and they have like a thing for each line. But what he said here, fire must cling to something. You can see here, fire must cling to something in order to burn. And that for me is a connection. Like somehow it can only burn when it connects with the wood, for example. That there is something that's so important here that has to do with connecting. And it is like the object, like, yeah, of course, in the Siddhic level, we don't have objects, like there's no duality, but there's almost like, there is a relationship between you and that food that you're desiring to eat, or that lover that you're desiring to penetrate or be penetrated by. Like there is a connection here. And without that connection, there can't be desire, because if it was already in you, you wouldn't grasp after it, and there wouldn't be the experience of it, and then the separation of it, and then the reflection of it. So connection seems to be a super, super important word here. So I'm going to stop sharing this one, and now you're going to.
I want to jump in there because of your response to what I said. I think is the most perfect way to respond to what I shared, because what happens with this gene key, and particularly once you're accessing those gift frequencies and really utilizing the full potential of this archetype, is you surrender to the connection, you surrender to the presence of the desire. And I think it's very, very wise to recognize that if you have a desire for Ben and Jerry's ice cream at 10 p.m., that eating broccoli instead, it's never necessary. You may not ever necessarily crave that broccoli at 10 p.m. And in fact, your eating that broccoli is part of that desire to transcend the desire for ice cream or a desire to feel better in your body. And when you're able to see the way that this functions, the only way that you can respond to it that allows you to have that deep experience that you're talking about, Bella, to go deep into the experience, to learn from it. In fact, to simply make the mistake that this desire is driving you in the direction of. You have to surrender to it. I mean, there's a line in Richard Rudd's writing where it's like, okay, universe, do whatever you're going to do to me. I'm on my knees and I surrender to it. And I feel like that's such a huge key for this particular gene key. And when we get lost in our ego, I mean, when I get lost in my ego of saying like, oh, there's a desire and that's not good for me, and I'm gonna like steer my desire some other direction as if I could, you know, it really makes me feel that aspect. It's not being helpless, but it's like there's nothing I can do about this thing. It's driving me and it's going to continue driving me. And all that I can really do is surrender to that connection, to cling to that which I guess I want to cling to, but that I can bring my body into the greatest harmony with clinging to. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, this is the beauty. This is an exploration. And I believe that because of those archetypes and them being different, is going to be a different kind of exploration that they are going to incite us to have. So I love how we don't know where we're going before and how we can play with it between us two. So I'm going to show this one. So this is like going deeper in the rabbit hole. This is in Spanish, but the way, so if the keyword here for the 30, if it is connection, and here we have the trigram of fire over the trigram of fire. So what Sergio has done is that he's saying basically that this is the third sign or the third house or the third color. And that would be a Gemini energy. And on a higher octave, it could also be a Uranus energy. Well, first and foremost, we know that Gemini or the third house is all about connection. It's all about short way travel siblings, like connections that are close, and communication, connection. And then Uranus on a higher octave, it's about, I feel even more in a way, the 30, because it has to do with those sudden changes. So, you know, if my hair would take fire right now, you know, it would be really unexpected and really fast. So those two planets are part of this explanation. And so here he has the lines and he's working with the lines. So let's say that this archetype, the fire starter, is connecting through the fire. It needs to have the wood to connect with. Your desire is connecting with an object of desire. It's going to have you connect with that and have an experience, whether good or bad. Something is going to come out of it. So I think it's interesting how he's looking at the lines. So starting at the first line, you know, when adherence happen, and adherence doesn't sound 100% positive. Connection sounds positive, but adherence. So in moments of adhesion, work with the basics. The first line would be, first and foremost, connect with you. So, you know, when you want to eat that thing, or you want to call that lover that doesn't maybe have the same fire for you that you have for them, you know, first connect with yourself and tap into that second line that has this natural genius in it, you know, with your luminosity. And then you can go like with the optimistic or the pessimistic in the third line. Is this going to be you said trial and error is going to be a failure. This is going to be great. Who knows? And then the fourth line say, okay, I understand. It's temporary. Once I've eaten that thing, once I've made love to this, it's going to be over. It's a connection, a heart connection, hopefully, but it's temporary. And then the fifth line says, tears and yet connection. So the fifth line kind of says, yeah, I know it's going to be messy. There's going to be tears, but there is a connection. In practicality, this is what we see. The crystallization of it, the conclusion of it is there is a connection. And then the sixth line where you and I are meeting, John, that is the corrective connection. So there is like a meaning, a purpose. There is something with this, that when you're having this experience, there is there's something on the other side. So this is actually Sergio's translation of the original I Ching, but in a way that when I connect with this, I can actually see the whole process. And this is what I know that Richard Rudd does as well for some of the spheres, where he says, this is the process, depending on the line, this is the whole process. So I like when we go into the archetype to kind of see their process. And for me to go from this abyss of desire that I can say, is it good, is it bad, follow it, like in Tantra, follow it, live it, be fully human, be fully woman. And then you listen to Richard Rudd, sublimate it. It's like, you can go crazy. But when this word that comes from the I Ching, the connection and the adhesion comes in, then suddenly I can see it much more clearly. And here, when we have the last thing I'm going to say here, when we have two of the same element, the way that Sergio sees it is that one is the background and one is the archetype. So you're going to have one of the trigrams is the archetype and one is the background. And if there are two different colors, and maybe we look at that some other time, it's going to be the archetype is one color and the background has another color. But here we have him in his element, and you can see the lightness that he is in his element. There is a lightness because there can be tears, but still there is connection. That's what he cares about. And then I also just love, this makes me think about spark, a fire spark. It makes me think a bit of that phoenix that you're speaking about in the 64 doors. So this is just another way of seeing it. So I think whenever we kind of go around in circle and we go down a rabbit hole and we read the Jinky book and we don't think that we become like more wise about it, what I love with the archetypes is that they say yes to the I Ching, they say yes to the human design and can understand the circuitry and what kind of process that's in there. And they always have different perspectives. So at the end of the day, I feel like you come to something that is rich and that makes you, feel calm with it. Like almost now I feel much calmer than a week ago about this archetype. And that feels good.
I love this picture because like to me, this is my interpretation of the picture. I don't know what the intention is, but it looks like this guy that's kind of up top there, he's jumping off a bridge into some water and he's doing the splits on the way down. Now, I don't know if anybody out there has been cliff diving before, but one of the really important things to do before cliff diving, if you want to keep yourself in one piece, is make sure you understand the depth of the water that you're jumping into. And so, but here is, regardless of what this person is, even, what their awareness is, they're doing it with that lightness, that sort of like, I'm jumping in like fully. On the way down, I'm going to do the thing that is the most fun for me to do along the way. I'm going to have a sense of humor about this. I'm going to be light about this. Maybe the water's too shallow, but I'm going to do the splits on the way down because that's what is lighthearted for me. And, it's like once you've decided to take that leap, and you're doing it in that particular way, it doesn't really matter what the consequences are. You've already accepted the consequences, be it you just land nicely in the water, or you hit the ground and you're fine, or you hit the ground and you can't walk anymore. It's like it's like this full throttle engagement with life. And I think because human beings have been so fully entrenched in these frequencies of fear for so long, that experiences like that full engagement are rare experiences in our lives. But that doesn't mean that in any moment we couldn't choose that.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean that in any moment we couldn't just suddenly put on that costume of the fire starter and just say, you know what? Screw it. I'm doing it. And I'm doing it with some humor and some fun and some lightness, no matter what happens, because I realize that my connection to this choice is so deep and strong that the consequences are only going to, well, this is why it's terrifying. They're only going to serve the collective. So that's why this particular one was terrifying for me, Bella. When you were speaking about the sixth line, is the correction of the connection,
Mhm.
to make sure that the connection contributes to something greater, is this particular key. You know, it means this energy, it means that my individual choices, if I follow the drives that move me forward in my life, they may have meaning only for me. They may never have meaning for anyone other than me. And so for that reason, you know, it really echoes that third line for that trial and error process.
Mhm.
And as a sixth line, you know, that third line is built in there for me.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of times my experience is that I want to correct the choice. I want to get it correct because of the vision that I can see. I'm less willing to engage in the error than maybe this particular gene key suggests. You know, so for me, I think what I take away from this archetype is that total willingness to make mistakes. I know that when I recognized that in my own journey into adulthood as a musician, once I was willing to make all of the mistakes while I was creating the music, it created this whole realm of freedom for me to go at it completely. And it really changed my playing and my expressions into something way more powerful than, for me, it was way more powerful for me. I don't know how my listeners felt, you know, but it was really strong impact to me.
Yeah.
So Bella, before we conclude today's discussion, any final thoughts on this archetype or what we've just been exploring, and how, I don't know,
I mean,
how
I
this
think
one plays into everything?
I do believe, and we have spoken about it in some other case, but one of the things that can block you here is the seriousness, which has to do with that kind of strive of perfection that you're speaking about, John. And I that's what I feel when we speak about, if this is a bit of like Gemini energy, it is here to communicate, it's here to be curious, and that is the opposite than to be over serious. If you have the 30, or if you want to connect with this archetype, it is to taste many different tastes of life and many different experiences, and that's this process. And I think it doesn't matter what line you have it in. You know, you could see that all the line description that we read, they are still connecting, they're still doing it. So I think that the worst thing here is to be over serious and then not want to do anything. And I think in a world right now, well, in a world where we have learned that failure isn't good, and that it's even dangerous to, you know, go your own way, I think it's extra important to tune into the fire of desire and allowing it. You know, somehow there is a part of me still that says you can't be logical about this. Sometimes you just have to follow your passion, whatever it is. You know, and it's easy to take the example of food, but there can be so many things that you just know. You know, I know that I would be in Mexico right now with a man that I've never spoken with him. I just know through another Gene Key ambassador, she's Mexican. She spoke to me about one session with this man who's like 73 years old or something. Just by hearing a little snippet of what he does, I knew I had to go there and that it was worth any risk to go. And then the thing happened with my dad, so now I'm going to Sweden. But otherwise, I would be in Mexico right now, and I just know it. And that's that kind of like that 30 just knows this is a fire that I need. Like that I need to ignite. This is a spark that I cannot miss. And these are the things that I believe that it's important to not have been so serious so that your life doesn't allow for that. Because I've seen parents with like infants that are still like breastfeeding, going in like sailboats around like the globe. So if that is possible, you know, and not necessarily, you know, ends in failure, then there is really not much. Well, the other of us can say that things are not possible, that we can't make it happen.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love that. I love that aspect of this particular archetype and how it functions, as it encourages us to, when we have like a small burning flame, to grab a little lighter fluid and just pour it on. So for those of you watching on Facebook, thank you for joining us for today's discussion of the fire starter. Our next meeting is actually going to be on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern to discuss Gene Key 55 and the game changer. So this is, as most people are aware, Gene Key 55 is at the center of the human genetic mutation that's happening amongst the collective at this time, and is one of the aspects of the gene key that is really, you know, like everything that is going on in the world is leading up to an exploration of this particular energy. So we'll be doing that on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern. And then, of course, at our regular time next Thursday as well. Bella mentioned that we will be creating a secure container for our discussions of Lunar Alchemy, and we will be posting the opportunities to get in connection with that, so just stay tuned for that. We will have that available as soon as it's ready to go and we can accommodate everyone who wants to join us for the discussion. We love having your energy present for the discussion. This is a quantum exploration, so your attention is particularly impactful, because that is one of the most powerful aspects of the quantum theory, that the observer and that which is observed are actually not separate, but are influencing and even creating each other in the moment. So we'll continue with our solar members now for the alchemical process, the quantum energetic transmission. You can learn more about how that works by clicking on the link that I posted in the comments there. And if you haven't, head on over to the 64 doors and check out the fire starter. There's some more aspects that you can engage in there, and we will look forward to seeing you in a future discussion.